A little disclaimer before the video starts. This video turned out quite a decent amount longer than I anticipated for it to be originally. But once I had started Orkambi and I felt everything I was feeling and I documented everything I was feeling when I was feeling it, I couldn't take it upon myself to take most of it out. So there is a lot in this video. A lot of it is very emotional. There are some things that are graphic. I have spoken on some things in this video, in the vlogs in this past week, but a majority of this are things I did not touch base upon, such as things like my eating disorder and things like that. So with that being said, I kind of want to do a little pre-story of my health in my life before this past week started when I got the Orkambi. Some of you do know me, some of you know my story, but a lot of you don't, or you're just meeting me and you kind of don't know where my health has been, the things that I've gone through health-wise, and how I've gotten to the place that I am to be able to get the drug. I am a 20-year-old cystic fibrosis patient. I live in South Louisiana. I've lived here my whole life. I have gone through several hospitals in my lifetime, but I am currently at the one that I was diagnosed at when I was 5 days old. At 5 days old, I had my meconium plug removed because I had not passed it yet, and that's kind of a problem with babies. Along with them taking that out, they also took out my appendix because they didn't know what was causing the problem, as well as testing me for both Hirschsprung's and cystic fibrosis because they could both cause the meconium plug to not have passed. So I did not come back positive for Hirschsprung's, but I did come back positive for cystic fibrosis. And along with that, they genetic tested me and I came back positive for chromosome 7 delta 508, the double of that. And that kind of became, I guess, the first step to my journey of getting Orkambi, because that is, you know, the gene you need for the drug. On top of the cystic fibrosis, I also have Ehlers-Danlos, which is another genetic disorder. I have diet-controlled CF-related diabetes. I have fibromyalgia, arthritis, PTSD, anxiety disorder, and I also have my spouts with depression. Chronic sinus polyps that grow back about every 4 to 6 months that I have to get taken out about 2 to 3 times a year. Over the last 4 or 5 years, I think it is now. I also have extreme scoliosis that affects my spine, my hips, my shoulders, and my neck. And so with my long list of medical issues, this drug has indeed been a task because it's kind of affected each of my things in a way. And it's been very, very interesting. I went through several hospitals growing up. I've gone through dozens of doctors, some that didn't know what they were talking about or didn't understand me or my body. I've had to do a lot of self-advocating for myself and what I knew was right for my body and what I knew I could handle physically and emotionally. Growing up, I was very, very underweight. I'm talking, I was 13, 14 years old and weighing 60 pounds at 5'5". Like, I was incredibly underweight. And my hospital, you know, of course, they didn't like that. And I grew up very active. I was on swim team, I played soccer, basketball, softball. I did cheer, gymnastics, I danced practically every single day. So I think I've listed all of them. I'm not quite sure, but I was very busy. And on top of that, I mean, I still sit on top of, you know, honor roll in my class, and I tutored, and I taught dancing, and I taught swimming, and I helped coach soccer. And I lived my life out to the fullest beyond. I had an amazing childhood. And though my childhood was mainly in adulthood, I wouldn't have had it any other way. And besides the point, with all of that, I couldn't keep any weight on. And on top of me doing all of those things, I was in the hospital 2 to 3 times a year for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. This was the hospitalization so close together and so often for so long started about the time I was 5 years old up until I was 18. With me being so underweight, the hospital had a huge problem with it. And instead of them asking me to drink the shakes, they just wanted to put a button in me and just force it in my stomach without my consent or my control, which I was not okay with, and my parents knew how not okay it was. So they helped me as a child self-advocate, and I am now almost 21 years old and do not and have never had a feeding tube. Which has not been an easy tale. Also, with ports, I do not have a port. I do PICC lines now. I started doing PICCs about 3.5, almost 4 years ago. My main issue with getting a port and with getting a feeding tube, from the time I was born, it didn't matter if I was aware of it or not, because I was a baby at the time, and it still happens to this day. If there is an IV in me or something, the part of my body like shuts down, and I can, be as functionable as a person as possible, but if there's an IV in my arm, that arm just won't move. So psychologically speaking, having a port and a feeding tube is quite terrifying because of what I can see subconsciously happens with just a peripheral or a PICC line or things of that matter. So, really long story short, I don't have either of those things, and I have made do with my own body the way I can. Growing up, I was told, the same thing as pretty much all CF patients, that we had to get all of our fat. It didn't matter how we got it. We had to eat as much McDonald's and ice cream and cheesecake or Burger King, Taco Bell, just whatever you think would make a normal person fat, they would tell us to do, but 10 times more. And I would do the best I could. I mean, the first year of my life, the nutritionist at the hospital, she didn't tell my parents to feed me normally like a regular baby. I had incredibly awful acid reflux. So mostly anything I would take in, it would immediately come up. So they ended up giving my parents this awful tasting baby formula that they would put in a syringe and kind of milk down with apple juice to try to get me to drink it. So for the first year of my life, I had practically no idea of food or textures or anything because I would be asleep when they would do that. First off, just for taste, and I had had no introduction to food until I was a year and a half. So textures for me is a really big issue. So I would do the best with my issue with textures, with the foods they would tell me I should eat. So with my very picky body, eating this stuff that had no nutritional value in it, I wasn't getting anything. So I was doing everything they were telling me, I just wasn't gaining the weight. And so growing up, every single person had something to say about my weight or how skinny I was, and they would just, random people would come up and they would grab me anywhere they could, and it's just so degrading. And it messed with my head, and I got just this awful body dysmorphia that I have to this day. And I've gone through issues with anorexia. There was a time period where I threw up a lot. Either I was bulimic or I was borderline. That was about the time that I was, I want to say 11 years old. All of which I am neither anymore. I completely changed my diet. I went to nutrition school over the last couple of years and completely turned my life around health-wise and just life in general. My lung functions before I had started the nutrition school were just awful. I was in my transition from pediatrics to adult. My lung functions had gone from the 60s to the 30s within a matter of months, and I had not had a doctor because of my transition it wasn't as smooth as others that I've heard, to put that into words. So I had not had a doctor for about a year, and I was doing everything on my own. And it got very complicated. In the middle of my lung functions dropping to 30, I also had a cervical cancer scare. I had to have a good bit of my cervix cut off and lasered and then burned. And then in the middle of that happening, I had to have emergency sinus surgery. So I was in bed rest for a good 2 to 3 months of the beginning of last year. And doing the nutrition school, completely changing my diet, cutting out all fast food, all sodas. I drank only water, cranberry juice here and there, and smoothies just when I need something, or just to have. I enjoy them, you know, whatever. And Ensure Plus, the chocolate one, because like vanilla's stupid. So, I completely changed my diet to whole foods. My blood sugar also had started to tank pretty bad, as it was going highs and lows like that. And they wanted to put me on insulin, but the way the woman described it to me scared me half to death, and I swore I wouldn't do it. That's when I decided to do the nutrition schooling. My A1C is now completely normal. I have diet controlled diabetes, so as long as I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm fine. And my weight I've gained 30 pounds in the last year and a half. So, you know, adding more nutrition, and it's changed my life for the better. I've been in the hospital once since my transition. It was this past January, and I was in for a good 50 to 60 days. My lung functions had only improved 4%, but since then they've improved almost 20. So last January, my lung functions were at 30%. And today, as of August 12th, my lung functions are at 82%. This was before I started Orkambi, about a month and a half ago that I had done my last PFTs. So to get me from that point to this point, to kind of have a little more hope with the Orkambi, has been a very big deal for me and for my health and for my life. A lot of people ask me about how I've gotten my lung functions up on my own without a doctor. So if you guys want to see a video about that, comment down below and let me know. I really want to get into this and help you guys out as much as possible, because I love seeing how much you are all loving my just day-to-day Orkambi videos. So, you know, and how much they're helping you. So if there's any other things that I could have under my belt that you might find useful, please let me know. Without further ado, here is my first week on Orkambi.